Hello and welcome to the latest podcast from Octo members. I'm Katey Pigden, Content Director, and as usual, I'll allow my guests to introduce themselves. So Chris, over to you if that's all right.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me on. I'm Chris Tuite. I am Head of Consumer Finance and a Director at financial services comms agency MRM.
And Chris, the reason we're having a little chat today is because I did rope you into writing a piece for me. As you may be able to tell from my job title, I'm quite interested in content, but how we're finding that online is changing quite a bit. So give our audience a little taster as to what we can expect our conversation to cover today.
Absolutely. Yeah. You didn't rope me, just to be clear. I was more than happy to do so, to write for the good Octo members audience. I think, the main thing that we wanted to discuss today was around how search is changing. Obviously, SEO and SEO marketing has been a massive part of how many businesses have found themselves pushing out their services and their goods over the last 10 to 15 years. It won't have escaped everyone's notice that AI has changed the game somewhat. I'm sure everybody listening to this has had a go on that. And actually, that now is fundamentally changing the way that search works and how discoverable businesses might be in it. So my colleagues and I have been looking quite closely at what that means for financial services firms and advice firms more generally. And so, I thought it might be useful to have a chat about it with yourself today.
Absolutely. Since I've been writing about financial services, I feel they love an acronym anyway. There's plenty out there. For those that don't know, SEO, what are we talking about in terms of SEO?
Okay, so
But we'll sort of reverse it back a little bit.
no problem. So that's search engine optimization. So that's essentially how can you make your website rank higher in the Google rankings when someone searches for something. So I'm sure we're all familiar with how you sort of ask Google a question or you put a statement into a search bar and then the answers that you're given are ranked in order of how useful the people at Google felt that it would be in answer to the question. So it's providing, essentially it was an engine to drive people towards niche information. It made it easier for people to find the things they wanted online. And the way that was formally presented was obviously with a list of links that you could then dive into and then put you into the right site where you could find the answer to your query. So search engine optimization was essentially that. There were two ways of doing it. Oh, I say was as in past tense. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. It's still a thing, but you can have paid search with SEO, which is you pay Google to list higher on the rankings, and obviously that's quite an expensive. It can be quite an expensive feat depending on what you want to be known for. And then the other thing is organic, and that's kind of the holy grail for a lot of brands, I think, which is where you end up being posted highest on Google because what you've got is most useful to answer the query on your site or the content that they decide to put higher up on that list.
So a lot of financial services firms, financial advice firms will have been using content in a way to obviously market their service, to show that, prospective clients out there what it is they do. A lot of people find things online, as we know, when you're first thinking, I need a particular service, and I'll do a quick Google, we used to say. We'll go on to do a quick Google. So if they feel that they've maybe just about started mastering that, what's changing? Because there's now a potentially new acronym that you might want to share with our listeners.
Yeah, more letters for everyone to learn, I'm afraid. I've heard this, it's still early days in this, but to explain what's happening is we're entering what we've dubbed a zero-click future for some of these high-ranking sites on Google. So the best way to probably explain this is to talk about a recent article that was quite big in my world, the world of PR, marketing, communications, where the Press Gazette ran a piece saying that search volumes for major publishers like The Mirror, The Sun and The Mail have lost between 50 to 80% of their search visibility since 2019.
Yeah.
So that's before the advent of AI, but what they're finding is that the advent of AI has increased that. And the reason for that is that they might have previously written articles or put information on their site that would help people to find answers to queries. But as we now have AI in our pockets, people are increasingly just asking the AI to give them the answer. And that means that you're no longer clicking through to the website, which means that you're no longer that they're no longer able to sell advertising revenues. And this creates a kind of major existential threat to them, because for those titles, the way that they were structured, that advertising revenue is a big part of how they monetize what they do. So what does that mean for sort of us? Well, we're into a new era of what has been dubbed GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, or AEO, or AIEO, if you want to go full vowels on it. But essentially what that means is that now you are looking to make sure that you're mentioned as one of the sources that AI is providing the answer from. So that slightly changes it. You no longer have that direct relationship with the person clicking through at the outset anyway, if they're using AI to give them answers to stuff. And actually the slight shift means that people now are wondering how they're able, or firms in particular, are wondering how they're able to rank highest in those answers. So if somebody says, where did you get the answer from? Or where can I go for more information? That their link to their product, service, or company is higher up on that list. That's essentially it in a nutshell. So it doesn't sound like a major change. And in some ways, it isn't. A phrase I've been using is everything is changed and nothing is different, but actually it is a very important distinction, and one that could have major impacts on who ranks highest in terms of getting those eyeballs from people who are searching through AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever you use.
Chris, I thought we were about to go like a bit old MacDonald, EIEIO. So,
I'm sure that will come up soon as well. Maybe we can start that here, Katey.
yeah, I mean,
The old
you heard
McDonald
it here
approach.
first. Once that catches on, we coined that one. But also sometimes you don't even have to go through ChatGPT itself or anything like that. If I am just still in that sort of more old-fashioned world and going on without even prompting, I'm getting AI results for things that I'm looking for. And I think people are thinking more specifically about questions now, and potentially financial services, oh, I need to find out about my pension, or I want to find out about this, or I don't know, or where do I get financial advice? That's going to be quite a tricky thing to navigate if it's already trying to give you the answers, and how accurate are some of those answers. Obviously, for us, we're very much of a financial advice, that trusted profession, highly qualified, the experts in it. They're the ones to help you navigate all of these sort of things that you're hearing, and speculation. We know the budget's coming up, all of that sort of stuff. So what can financial services firms be doing? You said sort of same but different type of thing, but maybe are there a few tips and tricks that they could start taking away and doing in their business?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. In terms of when I say nothing's changed but everything's different, the bottom line is on SEO was often based on how useful the content that the websites provided was, and Google would index and rank on that. So it was sort of a democracy in terms of that, which is these are the things that we think people who search for these terms are most looking for, and this is the best place thing to answer those queries. Those same principles apply, I think. The only difference is it's a lot more machine readable. So one of the things that you'll need to consider is maybe looking back at what content you've already got out there. How can you optimize it, to use the terminology, to make sure that it's visible to the crawlers who the AI uses on the sites to find the information and present the information as their own. And obviously the fastest way that they want to do that quickly, these AI engines. And so the best way you can do that is by, to some degree, mimicking the question and answer format that these large language models tend to use. So there is something in looking at how you can closer ape what the technology is doing. However, and you mentioned about, the industry that you guys speak to, and advice, and that human element. I think it's really crucial that you don't lose that too. And there's a bit of it's a bit of a dichotomy between these two, between these two poles of human first, writing stuff that's actually going to resonate with human beings and that they're going to feel and understand and relate to, as well as making things kind of readable. So you don't want to be too robotic in the language. You also want to kind of keep a bit of that to get that sort of human touch to it as well. And so it's a careful balancing act that we're looking closely at in terms of what does the structure of these things need to look like? What kind of content works better? Is it guides? Is it reports? Is it calculators? Is it just blogs? All that kind of good stuff. And then the other thing to mention is where else do you need to make sure that information is seen for it to be, because the AI doesn't just look at the websites. It looks at all sorts of other third-party sources,
Right?
like the media, like Octo, like other financial websites with domain authority, i.e. with higher ranking websites, to decide who they should be taking the information from. So you need to make sure how you're going to get that information, that report, that blog out there. One of the ways, obviously, you can do that is through the media, but other ways is by publishing on your own social channels and all that kind of good stuff. So in that way, nothing's different in terms of it's always been a good practice to try and get your message out there, get your brand name out there, try and get links back to your site and all that kind of good stuff. So that's similar. But what's slightly different is the way that that's delivered and how that's delivered in terms of the way the content's structured and striking that balance. So those are things that we need to consider. And then the other thing I'd add, Katey, if that's all right, is that, obviously we work in financial services and the regulators has a big say in what we put out in terms of financial promotions and financial content and all that kind of good stuff. So at the moment, the FCA is adopting the principle-based expectation. So there's no AI-specific rules as it stands, but the broad principles still apply. So we need to act with integrity, treat customers fairly, keep comms clear, fair, and not misleading. Listen to this, hopefully we'll be familiar with those terms. But AI can't be a black box.
See as well, clear communication.
Indeed. So AI can't be a black box. Firms must understand and explain their outputs. They need to avoid bias, make sure there's no mistakes or misleading content. All disclosures need human approval. That's one of the things that they've said. So you can't just rely on the AI to give you the answer. You need someone sitting on top of it to check what you're putting out. You need to keep records of what you put out. So any audit trails of AI generated content, approvals and edits need to be kept with other regulated oversight. And then human oversight is really important as well. So the buck won't stop with the robot.
No.
It will stop with the people using it. Exactly. So it's important to remember that the responsibility for accuracy, compliance always rests with the people and not the machine. So they're expecting it to be safe, explainable, documented, but overseen by humans and applying the same high standards as all financial communication. So all of that needs to be factored into, as well as sort of optimizing for answering those questions. How do we make sure we stay the right side of things in terms of regulatory responsibilities that we all have to?
Yeah. Lots to consider, really, isn't it? Because I think people sort of go, oh, I'll wait and see what the regulator says. And like you said, it's often a principled pace. And actually, the regulator will say, well, we're not going to dictate anyway how exactly you should do that. But here's what good practice might look like, and here's what bad practice and the things is. But also, it's so new for all of us, really. And it's changing so quickly. So there's that thing of, what can you trust? What information's out there? Once it is out there, how can that be manipulated maybe and stuff as well? And you mentioned that no click through sort of thing, that people won't click necessarily on websites. So I guess there's a bit of a challenge there as well, that you give enough information that it answers those questions. But then if you want them to know a bit more about your business, ideally they would still click through. And there's a thing there of like, well, actually I want them to be contacting me or knowing how to get in touch and things like that. And what's the next sort of step in that sense?
Yeah, this is where I think I'll go back to those two polls, Katey. So obviously this is a massive engine in terms of driving attention to what we're doing, right? Or what anyone's doing in a particular area. So I would say it absolutely fundamentally needs this AEO, AIEO, EIEO, GEO, whatever you're calling it. It needs to be part of your future marketing strategy and PR strategy and comm strategy. You need to have one nod to it, I think. But the other thing that we're seeing, and actually I think this probably more applies to kind of niche content, and this is where we might have more of an advantage in financial services, is you can build your own audiences as well.
Yeah.
And so people feel they don't need to go to AI for the answers if you're providing them with enough information, with enough different ways of consuming that information. There might be video content, it might be audio content, it could be reports, blogs, explainer series, whatever it is. And then the advantage you have as regulated financial professionals is you have the credentials to be able to answer those in a good way, and that is also rewarded by the GEO algorithms or the large language model algorithms, from what we can see with the early studies that have been done into that. So I think that having the idea that you want to build your own audience of people who other people can refer to and maintain that as almost like you got your own publications, you're your own kind of publication, and you've got your own responsibilities to kind of push stuff out that's going to engage your audience. That will be good as well, because then you'll have those direct relationships and you'll be able to maintain those direct relationships, and you get feedback from people in terms of what they want, and hopefully that will lead to business and all the rest of it. Now, I appreciate that takes time and a lot of effort. Some people might argue the advent of AI means that the production of that content might be easier than it once was. I think you've got to be walking a very fine balancing act of making sure that it isn't too bland or robotic, because people won't connect with that. but certainly there's ways to kind of, labor saving aspects to that, which could help in terms of kind of setting those things up, but also building that direct relationship through different types of content, like podcasts like this, Katey, or other things, is a massive way of doing it too. So I think it's a dual strategy. It's not just it's all going to come through large language models and generative engine optimization. I don't think that at all. Like with anything, there needs to be a blend of this stuff, and depending on what your priorities are, then you're going to be able to work out the strategy that works best for you.
Yeah, I think that human element is so important. Obviously, us in sort of content creation as well. You think those intros that you agonize over, or sort of personal things that you can relate to, and other people can then relate to that as well. And I think, financial services, particularly financial advice, it is such a personal thing. Yes, we can have sort of some people like you are in this sort of situation, but when people seek financial advice, there's often a sort of personal life event, something that's happened, something that they're thinking about, so they want that headache taken away. And actually, if that feels more human, and I think obviously for us, when we're seeing certain content, you can spot if it's AI currently. It will get more sophisticated, and maybe that will be harder to do as we go further down the line. But at the moment, it's refreshing when you do see the human piece behind something and think, oh, but that's not coming from my job just yet then, because it hasn't been able to replicate it quite yet. But also, we were saying about like the different types of content, and I think that's important for financial services businesses to think of as well, because actually there's an abundance of content out there, and I know from what I'm trying to produce and create as well. But sometimes there's that tendency to do, oh, I've just done that blog post, that's fine, and actually maybe there could be a nice follow-up from that, or maybe that can lead into your post on a social media channel, or maybe you have got a podcast and that can be turned into little clips, or you've got a video. Like you said, there's different ways that you can do it, and that's probably, if they start with their maybe existing content, and we would probably use terms such as like evergreen if something's going to constantly be needed and come back time after time, versus maybe sort of more time sensitive things. So if it is the budget announcement, and you just sort of want to get something out there and be that authoritative voice then. So what's your thoughts on that? Should they start with existing content and
Yeah,
work?
definitely. So what we're finding is joining the dots. I suppose is how I'd phrase what you said there, in terms of seeing where the opportunities are to use this stuff in different ways, without sweat what you've done, the hard work you've done already. Sweat it a bit more and make it work for you. That doesn't mean becoming boring or repeating the same things over and over again, but there are different ways that you can splice and dice the good stuff that people are creating to kind of join those dots for you. And that's really important, because again, that is what the AI will be doing. It will be looking behind the scenes and joining the dots and saying, where else has this been mentioned? How else have these guys been referred to? And what are the credentials like? And so continuing to talk about those things is only going to help you reaching up for those turning up for those kind of searches. So I think that's a kind of good principle. So going back over what you've got already, the other thing that's really, really important is recency as a factor. So we found that actually there's been a study done by a US firm called Muckrack, which is one of the big ones that is sort of starting to influence thinking on this. And this stuff will evolve as it goes on. But they've made it very clear that actually reports and thought leadership that's been produced inside the last 12 months is more likely to be cited. And when you think about that, that makes a lot more sense, because AI is looking for the most up-to-date answer on what the query may be. And because of that, media plays a massive role in that too. So they have authoritative media sites in different niches of different industries. It changes depending on which industry you're in, but there are sort of a list of publications where AI will go to first to see if things have been mentioned in there. And if they have, then that's more likely to reflect well on the organization that's been mentioned within it. So I think looking at what you've got already, and then thinking, in the future, what other things can we continue to say? What other research can we put out? What other information, helpful thought leadership can we put out that would help that sort of direct conversation that you're having, those direct audiences? So they're going to value that, but also that you can also present in a machine readable way to AI as well. So that's definitely kind of the way that I would look at it in terms of that. The recency is a massive part of that, and making sure that you have those two they're almost conflicting, but they're not. They're complementary ideas of machine readable, but also accessible to people and emotionally relevant. The other thing I would add is, and you make a really good point earlier, was around how people are searching for information now. So I've had I had an example recently in mortgage rates, which was quite interesting, where I was talking to a mortgage broker who was saying that they are receiving queries for specific rates. So it's no longer, can you please find me the best rate? Here's all my details. It's, I've been looking on AI, fed in all my information, and they've told me that I can get this rate from this lender. How likely is that? Could you go and make that happen, please? So the conversation is a few further steps along, where the consumer, if you like, feels a lot more empowered and has a lot more information. Now, again, in an advised environment, I think that's probably, you might need to take them a couple of steps back before you
Yes.
kind of move into that, which I think is going to be a really important education piece that people need to think about, which is, you need to go through these processes for your own checks and balances and financial security, frankly, based on what we said around what the regulator was looking at in terms of the principles approach. So there might be some work that needs to be done around that, because increasingly consumers are finding themselves better informed and feeling more empowered to ask questions further along the line than perhaps they would have done previously. So there's a conversation to be had around that, I think.
Yeah, I think there's also that warning as well of you might not know some of those things. So although you think you've been given that answer, if for any reason it is incorrect, and don't make those whole decisions based on that. Sort of do seek that professional advice if it's a real sort of tricky thing, because I think we can think we're informed, but there's so much out there, and there's also a lot of conflicting
Mm.
information out there. So like anything, it's then, okay, what are the checks and balances across that? And I suppose with advisors, there's also a bit of an uneasiness. Yes, you said, like you said earlier, a lot will have been testing AI, trying it in their business as well. But there's also that thing of client sensitive information. I can't really just put some of this stuff into these models. There's obviously more generic content that you can sort of do and try and entice people, but maybe there's been a reluctance to try some areas because it just does feel a little bit scary. And what am I doing here? And if I'm not sure what the regulator is going to say or isn't going to say at the moment, then I'm a little bit hesitant to try. So there might still be listeners out there going, yeah, I'm interested. I'm hearing obviously more and more about AI, but I still haven't taken the plunge yet myself.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make around the client data. I think, from what we're seeing, that's just a no-no. This is open. At the end of the day, this is open source technology. And so therefore, that's not something you should be posting into these areas. I think one thing that sort of is really interesting, and a principle that applies to this SEO stuff, is I think you need to offer value before you, and it's a horrible term, but it's one that I've seen used, extract value from your customers. So there's definitely, if you think in those terms, in terms of what sort of content you can produce, I think what you're doing is making the case for why advice is important, or why a consultancy or your product you're doing is important. And if you think about how can I tell that in the most clear question and answer format, but also with a human angle way possible, then I think you're going to end up with content that's going to land in the right kind of place. And so you needn't be nervous about that. I think talking in those terms is just good for the industry, right? It's just good for all of us, and it kind of raises the bar for other people and lets them see the value of what we've got. So maybe thinking in terms of, what is it I could say to my audience? What is it I could say to any potential customer who might be searching about something that would provide them with something that would be genuinely helpful?
Yeah.
How do I get that out there? What's the best way to bring that to life? How can I do that in the most efficient way possible? And where does it need to go outside of my own channels? So not just my social media, not just my website or whatever it is else I've got, but should I be posting it in Octo members? Should I be getting coverage in certain media titles? Are there any other partner organizations who might want to talk about this thing with me? And then we can all talk together, sort of thing. Because all of that helps. And then also talking about your credentials. Don't be shy talking about how well qualified you are in this space to speak about those issues. Because again, when the AI is looking for who to cite, it will be taking those things into account. So the more you can point to those credentials, the more you can point to the levels of experience, the types of things that you do for your clients, the better. And that helps with human interest stories, because invariably that does lead into conversations around, I helped a client, and maybe that's anonymized stuff, but if we can point to good outcomes that have good emotional ending for all of us, that follow all of the, what the SGA expects from us in terms of fair, misleading, clear comms, all of that kind of good stuff, then we're going to be in a better place than where we started. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here, but these are good principles to start applying to what you're putting out there, and to have in the back of your mind, how do I start to make this work for me? Because there's no doubt about it. This search model has changed.
Yeah.
And we're moving away from, click on a library when it comes to Google to this, some people have dubbed it an agentic approach. People are going to their AI agent to see if they can summarize some answers for them in a more digestible manner and a more easy to understand manner. So an adaptation is needed, but you don't have to throw everything out. You just need to update it and think about how you take it forward.
Is there a potential there to engage clients in the process as well? We said obviously not client sensitive information, but that sort of word of mouth of the experience they've had, how it solved their problems, how it made them feel, because testimonials, referrals, big thing for financial advice firms, really. If I can say, oh, Chris, the financial advisor I've got, absolutely brilliant. You said you had a bit of a problem with your pensions and stuff. Might be worth having a chat with so and so over here. I don't have one, by the way, that I'm going to name or anything like that. But those things might be useful in themselves, and case studies, and then that sort of helping, I suppose, prospective clients see, oh, that person sounds like a similar situation to me, not exactly the same, but that's useful as well. And it's just maybe another way to engage your clients. And
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a couple of things on that. Like, although AI makes it sound like the emotion's been taken out of this a little bit, actual decisions and deciding to use financial products is still an emotion-led decision, right? And so we will be seeking reassurance from the advisor, but also from other people who have had a similar experience that we can relate to. Not losing sight, as I mentioned before, in terms of those two poles, like, okay, it needs to be logical and readable and people need to understand that. But the more we can kind of talk in the terms of the benefit that it made, the better. I think the other thing to mention as well, conversations like this are happening online in other places. Forums like Reddit are really influential when it comes to AI stuff.
yeah,
And large language models. And if you ever dive into any of those, I'm not sure, some people do believe there be monsters, and I do understand that, but there are some really valuable conversations in there where people are sort of having genuine conversations about who are the top 5 providers when it comes to your pension, or who are the top 5 providers when it comes to your investment, or who do I use. They're looking for peer recommended stuff, right? And so those top 5 lists may even turn into an article somewhere else, and then all of a sudden you've got a bit of a consensus starting to build online about who the people who are posting in these influential places believe are the right firms to do certain things. And so there's no
yeah.
reason why you can't kind of try and insert yourself into those conversations, or try and, by doing all the basic principles we alluded to earlier.
We have another podcast series called Planner Unplugged. So I speak to financial advisors, financial planners, find out their route into the profession, how we can encourage new people in as well. But also there's that wider issue of a lot of people don't know what financial advice is, what
Mm.
financial planning is. So there's, I suppose, the potential there with AI that there will be a little bit more explanations around that. If people are sort of then searching, what is financial planning? Why do I need a financial advisor? That potentially there's opportunities for advisors in that way, that there'll be answers delivered to people, or sort of trying to encourage them as to, yep, this might be a complex thing and you think you've got some information, but take the next step and go and speak to a professional about this potentially.
Yeah, I think so. And again, that's another good principle to think about, is work back from the questions that you get asked, right? You guys are at the coalface. You are often approached about this sort of stuff. You'll know what clients' emotional and intellectual journeys are like on this sort of stuff. So take some time to think about what are the common questions you get asked, and how can you respond to those in the most useful way. And then I think, that will then illustrate more the kind of the value that you guys can bring. So yeah, I think it's a very good rule of thumb to kind of bring into the mix.
Yeah. And just finally, Chris, there's obviously all different shapes and sizes of financial services firms out there. So some of the bigger ones might be like, yeah, we're on top of this already. We've been playing around with AI for a while. This is forming part of our strategy. Other smaller firms might be going, oh, do you know what? This is just another thing for me, me to think about. I wear so many hats already. I'm good at giving financial advice. And now I've suddenly got to think about marketing. I've got to think about content. I've got to think about all these other things while keeping on top of the regulation. I may be assuming, it could be the flip of that. Actually, a small firm could be like, we're more nimble, we can do this. The bigger firms might also be going, oh, this is a headache for us. But what do you think? Is this likely to play out differently depending on what size, whereabouts you are in the market, or something for everyone to be thinking about regardless?
I can only think of SEO as a previous kind of example of how such a fundamental change happened in how people market goods and services, that led to massive changes. And and I'm sure people will be aware of this, past performance on this pod, at least past performance is no indicator of future performance, of course. When you look at what happened around that, you'll find that a lot of niche companies were able to find their way to the top just by adopting these principles and providing themselves to be quite useful. So I wouldn't necessarily see it through size, although look, large budgets and larger capabilities are going to help with that. On the converse, you've got more to consider. You're not as nimble as you said. But actually, I think if you think more carefully about, just make sure this is in your planning and you're doing as much as you can to support it, you might find yourself surprised about this. The other thing is that SEO as a concept evolved over time. So Google changed it to provide validation for high quality content. In the old days of SEO, you get a thing called black hat SEO and white hat SEO, which was people who were trying to game the algorithm by putting backlinks and all sorts of stuff. And some of your listeners may be old enough to kind of remember that sort of weird period. And so the reason I mention that is I think this will change. Okay. So, not to put more on the to-do list, I think keeping one eye on it and experimenting and trying to kind of see what works for you, and having it also in your mind that I need to make sure that everything I do is machine readable and kind of works for that, but also is going to work if I'm having a conversation with a human being. Those are good guiding principles, which mean that I think you're going to end up in a better situation than if you do nothing around this sort of stuff. And then it's about using the tools in other ways. How do I use the automation tools to get the best out of my message and the human message that I want to bring to people. And so, I'd have a look at things like that. And obviously you can talk to people like me. There are loads of us out there, follow on LinkedIn and all that kind of good stuff, because we're talking about this all the time. And so that might be a good way for you to see what's happening and stay on top of the trends, because invariably this is going to evolve and change over time. But, I think hopefully we've got some good starting points for people to consider as they head out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Chris, as well, of that sort of keeping an eye on what's happening now, but also how that may change, because we can sort of fall into that thing of like, right, okay, I'll get everything ready for this new world, and then, oh, hold on, that's all changed again. So just sort of seeing how that evolves over time as well, because potentially it will shift the way it's looking for those things, and hopefully quality content will rise to the top. And that's something we all sort of then strive for, of like going, okay, well, how can we stand out in this crowded space? But yeah, lots for people to think about. And you never know, you may be inundated, Chris, with people saying, yeah, to tell me a little bit more. So,
I'm more than happy to have the conversation. I've gone very deep on this. So, it's subjects I'm energized and interested in. So people just want to have a general chat about it, then, do look me up on LinkedIn, do drop me an email, whatever. I'm more than happy to have a conversation.
Brilliant. And I'm sure as it goes on, we'll probably have another one as well, Chris, and I may rope you into writing a few more pieces
Willingly roped, Katey, and I'll try and get an old McDonald reference into the next one.
Absolutely.
Challenge accepted.
There we go. Oh, well, thank you very much, Chris, for your time, and thank you to all of our listeners.
My pleasure.